My name's Grant Oster. I met Laura while I was working on my master's in chemistry. We were both on the same page right off the bat, but it took her about 6 months to feel the same way. We weren't really experienced, but we had a blast in bed, and she never complained. We got married less than a year after she graduated. We both got jobs in the same city. She taught at a community college, and I taught part-time at a state university and worked part-time. After 3 years of marriage, I left the university and started working full-time as a consultant for a science consulting firm. I specialized in explosives, and one of my clients was the federal government. During the birth of our first daughter, Angela, my government work involved a lot of travel. I know it was rough on Laura, but I proposed quitting to work full-time as a teacher at a local college, which had tried to recruit me multiple times. But Laura liked the money and the lifestyle that my job provided, and she encouraged me to stick with it. She'd always say, "I can survive. I'm self-sufficient." Even after our second daughter, Grace, was born 2 years after Angela, I still traveled a lot. I suggested we change jobs again, but Laura said I should stick with consulting. It was tough to juggle the extra responsibilities of raising 2 kids when they turned 5 and 7. Eventually, my schedule eased up, and Laura went back to work. She got an administrative job at the local university, mostly working with the liberal arts college. I never really understood why, but it didn't bother me. Laura got really into photography. We've got over a dozen albums that document our lives with the kids. During that time, she also developed a surprising interest in other languages, especially Italian. She'd travel for work sometimes, especially to Chicago, where she'd attend meetings with benefactors, visit professors, and go to the Art Institute. She also visited Gina, a college friend who had been an Italian exchange student and was now working in Chicago when our kids were 8 and 10. Because of all the terrorist stuff going on, the government thought my skills were really valuable. They recruited me to work full-time. I talked to Laura about taking a 2-year trip before I took the job. It would mean more travel, maybe even for longer, and sometimes being away for over a month. Laura told me to go for it, saying she and the girls would miss me, but they'd be fine. But my government job meant I was away for 2 Christmases in a row, when Grace was 9 and 10 and Angela was 11 and 12. It was really tough. It was rough. Laura took the girls to visit Gina in Chicago during that time. I stayed in touch with them every day on the phone, and they seemed happy. Gina's relatives, including kids around our daughter's age, were there too. After over 2 years of fighting terrorism, I went back to work at Full Rewiring. Laura took the girls to visit Gina in Chicago during this time. I talked to them on the phone every day for their whole week-long visit, and they seemed happy. Gina's relatives, including kids around our daughter's age, were there too. After over 2 years of fighting terrorism, I went back to work full-time, consulting with minimal travel. Laura still traveled every now and then, usually out once a month for a few days, mostly to Chicago. I was happy to take on all the parental duties for Grace and Angela when she was away, although sometimes they came with her. It's normal for girls to get closer to their mom, and even though I had a good relationship with Grace and Angela, they rewrite the text in a way that makes it sound like a typical workday. Rewrite the text in a way that makes it sound like a typical workday. Rewrite the text in a way that makes it sound like a typical workday. Laura still traveled every now and then, usually once a month for a few days, mostly to Chicago. I gladly took on all parental duties for Grace and Angela when she was away, although sometimes they came along. It's normal for girls to grow closer to their mom, and even though I had a good relationship with Grace and Angela, they didn't really confide in me or ask for my opinion on personal stuff. I didn't mind, except for one thing: they never shared their experiences or talked about their trips to Chicago with their mom. They weren't super shy, but they also weren't sharing everything. They'd changed the subject right before 18. They didn't really talk to me about personal stuff, which was different from how they were with Laura. I didn't mind, except for one thing: they never talked about their trips to Chicago with their mom. They weren't super talkative, but they also never gave out info about what they did. They'd change the subject, just like they did when they were 18. Grace went to college in another state, and Angela was a junior at another college there. Laura went through a tough time after she found out she was crying a lot. I asked her about it, and she said it was because she was an empty nester. She suggested a shopping trip to Chicago with the girls. We quickly planned the trip, but it turned out we had to have a bunch of long talks with Gina in Italian. I didn't understand Italian, but I took Laura at her word about the details, even though she was unusually emotional in the days leading up to their departure. Laura returned from Chicago after an extra 3 days, showing a more positive outlook, though not entirely back to normal. What truly surprised me, though, was the limited number of purchases they brought back from their shopping trip. Upon inquiry I found out that some items would be shipped later, including those sent directly to the girls' college addresses. I did see a positive change in my bed life, which was never a problem except during my prolonged absences when I remained faithful to Laura. This improvement happened around the same time as Grace leaving for school, and I think it's because Laura and I are growing closer as empty nesters. We're really enjoying this newfound love. I found out that some items would be shipped later, including those sent directly to the girls' college addresses. I did notice a positive change in my bed life, which was never an issue except during my prolonged absences when I remained faithful to Laura. This improvement happened around the time that Grace left for school. I thought it was because Laura and I were growing closer as empty nesters, enjoying the heightened love. Then, the pivotal event in my story unfolded. Update: I took an unplanned break from work around noon on a Thursday without telling Laura, who was at her usual workplace. I had planned to play 9 holes of golf, but the rain ruined my plans. I was getting ready for our anniversary and wanted to surprise Laura with a party. So, I talked to an event planner around 3:30 p.m. to plan it. Then, a delivery guy showed up with a wooden box marked "Fragile." He pushed it up the 4 front stairs to our place. The box was addressed to Laura, and after I signed for it, we put it in the living room with the label facing up so you could see the name Romano Photography Studios and an address in Chicago Center City. I gave Laura a call at work to let her know about the delivery. At first, she didn't say much, but then she said it was work-related. I figured this was related, and it was supposed to be sent to her office with a plan to have someone bring it there the next day. While this seemed reasonable, I had 3 reasons to be suspicious. The long silence on the phone was unusual for the chatty Laura. She sounded really authoritative when she told me not to open it, and her voice was really stressed. She also seemed really stressed. I took some pictures of the crate and entered the return address info. I snapped a few pics of the crate and the return address, and then I uploaded them to my laptop. When Laura got back from work, she looked at the crate really quickly and seemed suspicious. When I asked her about what was in it, she didn't answer very well. I thought maybe there was something wrong, so I offered to help open it to be helpful and to see how she would react. But she said she wanted to check it at work to see if there was any damage or if it needed to be put on an insurance claim. The next morning, before I left for work, 2 maintenance guys from her college carefully moved the crate. When Laura got back from work, she looked over the crate real quick, acting kinda shady. I asked her about what was in it, but she wouldn't tell me much. I figured something was up, so I offered to help open it to see what was inside. She said she'd check it out at work to see if there was any damage or if it needed to be put on an insurance claim. The next morning, before I left for work, a couple of maintenance guys from her college moved the crate to a school van. I was pretty excited about the school exhibition, and I tried to get Laura to agree with me, but she wouldn't look at me and kept saying she wasn't sure if that was the plan. She said she'd keep me posted if they decided to do the exhibition. Then, she stuttered twice in 14 hours about the same thing. That's not like her, so I got even more curious. I created a school van under Laura's supervision. When I shared my excitement about the school exhibition, I was really trying to gauge Laura's response. She avoided eye contact and hesitated, mentioning uncertainly that she wasn't sure if that was the purpose, but she assured me that she would let me know if they decided on an exhibition. The fact that she stuttered twice in 14 hours about the same topic, something unusual for the usually eloquent Laura, only fueled my curiosity. I was even more curious about it. I wasn't sure what would. The 5th thing that made me suspicious was that Laura didn't say anything about the mysterious crate for the next 2 weeks after the package arrived. I did some digging and found out all I could about Romano Photographic Studios. This company was basically the U.S. business front for the famous photographer Piero Romano, someone I might have heard of before. Laura never mentioned him, even though she talked about artists and photographers a lot when she was talking about her photography hobby and her work at university. Piero Romano had a distinctive style. A lot of his photos were really realistic, and he also used different effects. He was really good at traditional photography techniques like bokeh, blur, panning, the rule of thirds, and long exposure. He also liked to mix and match different effects in a single photo. He was also the only one who did certain things the way he did. Laura never mentioned Piero Romano, even though she talked about other artists and photographers all the time. He had a unique style, and most of his photos were real and had various effects. He was really good at traditional photography techniques like bokeh, blur, panning, the rule of thirds, and long exposure. He was also the only person who did an effect named after him, Romano Abilità, which means Romano's artistry. It's hard to describe, but it makes some things look super realistic while making other things look blurry with changes in color or shade. But to be honest, that description doesn't really do it justice. I learned a lot about Piero, and two things really stood out. Romano Abilità was an artist who had a unique effect named after him. It's hard to describe, but I'll give it a shot. Some features look super realistic, while others look blurry with changes in color or shade. But to be honest, this description doesn't do it justice. Piero was both smart and talented, but two astonishing facts about him were that his niece, Gina Romano Bianni, was in charge of the administration at his studio. I'd only met Gina once, and I never met her in Chicago. I knew her as Gina Bianni. Also, Piero died in a car crash on September 1 the year before, and his memorial service in Chicago before his body was sent to his family's burial plot in Italy was on September 6th. The timing seemed very coincidental. Laura got emotional around September. Gina Romano Bianni, Piero's niece and Laura's friend, was running the show at his studio. I'd only met her once, and never in Chicago. She was married under her last name, Bianni. Also, Piero died in a car crash on September 1 the year before, and his memorial service in Chicago, before his body was sent to his family's burial plot in Italy, happened on September 6th. The timing seemed really coincidental. Laura got emotional around September 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, supposedly about becoming an empty nester, and her and the girls' shopping trip to Chicago from September 5th through 8th. I'm no rocket scientist, but I've got a master's in chemistry from one of the top 10 schools in the country, so I could figure it out. Despite the heartbreaking realization, the only reasonable explanation was that Laura had been. I've got some more info about the trip. It looks like Laura's been seeing this guy named Pi Romano for about 10 years, and the girls knew about it. There's also an exhibition coming up in Chicago on April 16 and 18. They're showing off some of Pi's most famous works, including pieces from private collectors and some that have never been shown before. This info is pretty interesting. I was pretty sure Laura would have a business trip to Chicago around that time, even though the 18th was my birthday and the exhibition probably featured the photographs from the crate that were delivered to our house 2 weeks earlier. Update: I have never felt more driven in my life to come up with a plan for dealing with my unfaithful wife and disloyal daughters. I had to keep my cool to get my ducks in a row, so I booked a business trip for the night I found out. I left a heartfelt message on Laura's work phone, apologizing profusely and promising to make it up to you before packing what I needed for a 3-day trip. I was livid, but I had to keep it together to get what I wanted. So I set up a business trip for that night. When I found out, I left a long message on Laura's work phone, saying sorry a lot and that I'd make it up to you. Then I packed what I needed for a 3-night stay at a local hotel. My plan was to get all the papers I needed to get divorced and file them once I had the proof I needed. Then I was going to find someone to visit and film the Chicago exhibition on its opening day, the 16th, which was by invitation only. I was also planning to sort through my things to see what I could pack. I didn't have strong feelings about Laura, and I was pretty close to having the same about Grace. Angela. Part 4 was about ultimate revenge, even after the divorce was finalized. Part 1 was a breeze. I got a recommendation for a good divorce attorney, Gail Schiff. She walked me through everything I needed to do, and even though she recommended irreconcilable differences as grounds, she was willing to proceed with long-standing infidelity. Gail just needed a little proof before she could file the papers, which I expected to have for her on the morning of the 17th. She could arrange for service on. Laura was there with a law enforcement agent other than the county sheriff, along with a private process server, to record events on the last night of the exhibition on the 18th for Part 2. I also looked into as many art appraisers in Chicago as I could find. I found a young appraiser named Roberto Milan trying to build his business. I went to see him in Chicago and talked with him for almost a full day. Roberto knew about PIO's work and thought he might be able to get an invitation to the opening. On the 16th, I was thinking about filming the photos I thought would interest me using a small, expensive, easily hidden HD camera. I gave him the camera, and he said he could provide a thorough and high appraisal of the photos. I thought his final words, where he expressed the desire for a challenge to establish himself as a legitimate player in the art appraisal world, were convincing. I hired Roberto for a segment of Parts 3 and 4. I cashed in 2 bearer bonds from our safe deposit box, totaling about $25, and I couldn't remember if Laura knew about them, but I was pretty sure she wouldn't know now. They're worth about $25,000 total now. 000 for another part of Part 3. I gave my lawyer a complete list of all our assets, including an appraisal of our house. I took pictures of all of Laura's jewelry and everything in our safe deposit box, except for the bearer bonds, and I gave my lawyer updated bank statements, credit card numbers, and outstanding purchases, retirement plans, and brokerage accounts. As a small part of for another part of Part 3, I gave my lawyer a complete list of all our assets, including an appraisal of our house. I took pictures of all of Laura's jewelry and everything in our safe deposit box, except for the bearer bonds, and gave my lawyer updated bank statements, credit card numbers, and outstanding purchases, retirement plans, and brokerage accounts as a small part of. On the last day of my supposed absence, I snuck into the house while Laura was at work. I took a magic marker and erased my face from every photo in the dozen or so albums she had put together over the years. I had never looked at them all before, and I was surprised to find that I appeared in no more than 15% of the photos. I also found 2 photos I hadn't seen before, and even if I had seen them before, I would have thought they were innocent. They had Laura, Gina, Grace, and Angela in them, and Pierrot, too. I made high-quality scans and photocopies of the photos and put them back in the album. I crossed out Pierrot and wrote "the love of Laura's life" in an arrow next to him. 2 days after I got back from my business trip, Laura told me that she had to go to Chicago from the morning of the 15th to the afternoon of the 19th. She was bummed that I wasn't spending my birthday with her. I suggested going with her, but she refused, saying it was all business. She promised to take me to a resort the following weekend, saying she'd make it up to me in a way I'd never experienced before. I had to go to Chicago from the morning of the 15th to the afternoon of the 19th. She was bummed that I wasn't spending my birthday with her. I suggested going with her, but she refused, saying it was all business. She promised to take me to a resort the following weekend, saying she'd make it up to me in a way I'd never experienced before. She even kissed me. I thought she was just a $3 fancy woman, so I just enjoyed myself. She made a noise like she wasn't enjoying it, but she acted like it was just a little taste of what was to come. For Parts 1, 3, and 4 of my plan, there was a particularly risky aspect. The rest of it, especially after getting comfortable with and hiring the art appraiser, I was pretty confident that the rest of the plan would fall into place. The risky part was talking to Grace and deciding that I needed a face-to-face meeting with her as soon as I dropped Laura off at the airport on the morning of the 15th. I drove about 180 miles from Columbus to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where Grace was studying chemical engineering. Why Grace and not Angela, though? They both took after their mom more than Angela did. Grace was more like me, at least in terms of how her brain worked, than Angela. Neither Angela nor Laura could ever imagine a course of study in chemical engineering that was related to my degrees in chemistry. Also, Grace had a harder time lying than either Angela or Laura, and although her failure to tell me about Laura's love affair with Pierrot suggested otherwise, or maybe not, she seemed like Grace and I were more alike than Angela and I in terms of how our brains worked. Neither Angela nor Laura could imagine a chemical engineering course related to my chemistry degree. Grace had a harder time lying than Angela or Laura. But when she didn't tell me about Laura's relationship with Pierrot, it seemed like she was more focused on a traditional family than Angela was. I called Grace on her cell when I was about halfway there, and she sounded excited to meet up. I told her I'd take her to a late lunch at a real restaurant. We met at the restaurant of her choice, about a mile from campus, and got a private booth. After we ate, I told Grace there was something serious I needed to talk to her about. I was more focused on the nuclear family than Angela was. I gave Grace a call on her cell halfway there, and she seemed excited to meet. I told her I'd take her to a late lunch at a real restaurant. We met at the restaurant of her choosing, about a mile from campus, and got a secluded booth. After we ate, I told Grace there was a very serious matter I needed to discuss with her. She looked confused before saying okay. I asked her to promise not to tell anyone, not even her mom or Angela, about what we talked about, at least until the day after my birthday. I asked for her promise, raising my hand in the I swear position. She looked a bit shocked and said, "Wow, sounds serious." "Okay, Dad. I promise." I lifted her hand and tried to smile. She looked confused for a second, and then I told her not to tell anyone about our conversation, not even her mom or Angela, until the day after my birthday. I asked her to promise, and I raised my hand like I was making a promise. She looked a bit shocked and said, "Wow, sounds serious." "Okay, Dad. I promise." Then she told me she learned about your mom's relationship with Pierre Romano, and she's thinking about getting a divorce. "Oh no, Daddy," she said, covering her mouth with her hand. She started crying right away. I said, "There's only one hope. I need you to gather all the info you have about it, and I need you to take a DNA test." She almost lost it, saying that Then she said, "I learned about your mom's thing with Piero Romano, and I'm thinking about getting a divorce." "Oh no, Daddy," she said, covering her mouth with her hand. Tears welled up instantly. "There's only one hope," I said. "I need you to gather all the info you have about it, and I need you to get a DNA test." The restaurant wasn't the right setting, I told her. "Let's meet outside, and then we'll head to my car." After I paid the bill, I found the waitress, gave her a $120 tip, and saw that Grace was still crying on the sidewalk. Once in my car, I felt like I had to figure things out. I told Grace that our family's survival depended on her opening up. After a bit of crying, I told her that the restaurant wasn't the right place for that talk. I told her to meet me outside, and then we'd go to my car. After I paid the bill, I found the waitress, gave her a $120 tip, and saw that Grace was still crying on the sidewalk. When we got in my car, I felt like we needed to talk about it. I told Grace that our family's survival depended on her opening up. After a bit, she started to talk, but she had a hard time expressing herself. I just looked at her, and she started telling me that she didn't realize Mom was dating Pierrot, or Uncle Pierrot, that's what we were told to call him, until she was 12. Even though we saw them showing affection every time we were in Chicago, especially at Christmas, Grace didn't realize it. Angela knew before she did, but Grace didn't. She had a hard time expressing herself, and when she tried to tell me something, she just looked at me. She said she didn't realize Mom was dating Pierrot, or Uncle Pierrot, that's what we were supposed to call him, until she was 12. We saw them showing affection every time we were in Chicago, especially at Christmas, but Grace didn't realize it. Angela knew before she did, but Grace wasn't as sophisticated as Angela. When she asked Mom about it, Mom said it was an adult thing. She said she was in love with 2 men and that I'd understand when I grew up. Mom said I should never know about it because it could mean the end of our family. She said I was too insensitive, and that's the word she used to understand such things. So, I promised her I'd never tell. Grace started crying again, but then she kept talking about her experiences. She said she had hoped Pierrot's funeral would be the end of it all and that you would never find out. But after Mom made a scene at Pierrot's casket, Grace confronted her again. She told Mom that if she jumped into someone else's arms, she would reveal the entire story to me. Mom was like, "Grace, how'd you get all worked up again?" and started asking her how she got emotional and started talking about what happened. She said she hoped Pierrot's funeral would be the end of it all and that you would never find out. But after Mom made a scene at Pierrot's casket, Grace confronted her again. She told Mom that if she jumped into someone else's arms, she would tell me everything. Mom said Grace couldn't be her mom and asked how she could love Piero and me. She said there would be no one else. Grace believed her and hoped that the day I found out would never come. She was positive that Mom wouldn't get involved with someone else or even have an affair. Affair update: I got more details from her until I felt it would be a bad idea to ask more questions. She was in anguish, just like I thought she'd be when I told her why I was there. I said I wanted to make peace with Grace's mom, based on what she told me. But I needed one more thing to be sure. I asked us both to give DNA samples to see if we were biologically related. Grace cried and said I was her only dad. I told her I'm your dad, but I need to know for sure if I'm your real dad too. After a lot of back and forth, she finally agreed. I gave her the letter with the envelope for the lab and sealed it. The instructions were to mail the results to Grace and me. As I drove her back to campus, she watched me drop the envelope in an express mailbox. Mailbox. When we hugged goodbye, she begged me to forgive Mom and make it work. I told her I couldn't promise that right then, since I don't lie like she does. I told her Grace had done her part to make it more likely that it would work. I told her not to tell anyone about our talk until the 19th at the earliest. She promised me with a smile, and then we hugged goodbye, and she begged me to forgive Mom and make it work. I told her I couldn't promise that right then, since I don't lie like she does. But I did say that Grace had done her part to make it more likely that it would work. I told her not to tell anyone about our talk until the 19th at the earliest. She promised, and then hesitated and said one more thing. She told me that Mom and Angela would be at a Chicago exhibition of Piero's works, some of which had photographs of Mom on my birthday. She said Mom apologized for the timing, but Mom had to go because works inherited from Piero under his will would be displayed. Mom wanted Grace to go too, but she had a lot on her plate. I was about to say something else when she told me that Mom and Angela were going to a Chicago exhibition of Piero's works. Some of the art had pictures of Mom, and it was on display on my birthday. She said Mom was sorry about the timing, but Mom had to go because of the art that Piero left her in his will. Mom wanted Grace to go with her, but she couldn't because of her schoolwork. I smiled and said, I know, thanks for being honest. After another hug, she left, and I shed a few tears because I realized that my relationship with Angela was as dead as the one with Lore. Wasn't sure if I could make it work with Grace. I hadn't told Grace that I'd recorded our chat in the car. There was one thing Grace didn't know. I smiled and casually replied, I know, thanks for being honest. After another hug, she left, unseen by me. I shed some tears, realizing that my relationship with Angela was now as dead as the one with Laura. I hadn't decided if I could salvage it with Grace. Grace didn't know I'd recorded our chat in the car. There was one thing Grace didn't know, that I would cause her pain. It was all part of my plan. The swabs I put in the envelope that was supposedly mine belonged to an Italian janitor who worked in my office building. I'd been friends with him for years. I promised to pay to have his ancestry determined as a birthday present. He didn't even ask why I needed 3 swabs. That would cause her pain, and it was all part of my plan. The swabs that I put in the envelope that was supposedly mine belonged to an Italian janitor who worked in my office building. I'd been friends with him for years. I promised to pay to have his ancestry determined as a birthday present. He didn't even ask why I needed 3 swabs. Instead of just 1, I sent in 3 for testing. His results showed he was more than 80% Italian, with some Eastern and Western European in small contributions, which made him happy. So why did I put an Italian's DNA in what was to be tested instead of mine? I wanted everyone to be in pain. The reason I used an Italian is that during DNA testing, they can find out the heritage. I used an Italian because during the DNA testing, they can determine the contributor's heritage, even if you compare 2 sets. Since Piero was Italian, I wanted everyone to conclude that he was the father of Grace. I crossed my fingers, hoping Grace wouldn't spill the beans. I talked to her on the phone on the 16th and 18th, and she assured me she hadn't. I figured, since I hadn't heard from Laura, that must mean Grace hadn't either. At 11:00 p.m. I wanted everyone to think Pierrot was Grace's dad, even though he was Italian. I crossed my fingers, hoping Grace wouldn't spill the beans. I talked to her on the phone on the 16th and 18th, and she said she hadn't. I hadn't heard from Laura, so I was pretty sure that was true. On the 16th, Roberto Milan emailed me photos of the relevant parts of the Romano exhibit. They hurt me more than I thought they would. I was shaking like a leaf as I sobbed while looking at them. There was a series of 10 photos, getting bigger from the first to the last, all with distinctive Romano Abilità Artistica effects, including the last 2 brilliant Romano Abilità Artistica effects. The series was called Natalie Amore Christmas Love. At 10:00 p.m. On the 16th, Roberto Milan sent me the photos of the relevant parts of the Romano exhibit. They hit me harder than I thought they would. I was literally shaking like a leaf as I sobbed while looking at them. There was a series of 10 photos, increasing in size from the first to the last, all with distinctive O characteristics, including the last 2 brilliant Romano Abilità Artistica effects. The series was called Natalie Amore Christmas Love. I was particularly affected by the first 2, which showed 2 girls in the background of a photo of a woman who was clearly Laura. Their faces were blurred out, but their hair gave it away, Christmas gifts from my family. In the second photo of the first 2, one of Laura's bodies was. I was pretty torn up by the first 2 photos in the series, which showed 2 girls in the background of a photo of a woman who was clearly Laura. Their hair was a dead giveaway that it was Angela and Grace, who were about 9 and 11 at the time. In the second photo, one of Laura's bodies was exposed, and she had what could only be described as a duck-me-up look. The next 3 photos showed Laura in progressively less clothing, until the final one, where she was, well, you can imagine the second series started again with a photo where the girls were in the background, this time somewhat older. The last 4 photos were more risque, with Laura in some pretty provocative poses. The last photo was the second series started with a photo of the girls in the background, and they looked older. The last 4 were progressively risque, and the second to last one had Laura in an exceptionally suggestive pose. The last one had the clear implication that she had just been ducked and was in bliss. After I threw up, drank some ginger ale, and had a good cry, I looked at the photos again. If they didn't break my heart, I'd have to say that the last 2 were probably the best of their type I'd ever seen. I read the text that went with Roberto Milan's report. Sorry, I know this will be hard on you, but the collection is worth a minimum of $300. It's more likely $500,000. The second-to-last photo alone would bring between $125,000 and $175,000. The last 2 photos are the best examples of Romano's ability to create art. And I'm not just saying that. At least 4 other people who know about art and are talking about them would agree. I asked Gina if they were for sale, and she put me in touch with the owner, as per Pierrot's will. Not surprisingly, Laura said they weren't for sale at the moment. They were priceless, and the 4 where she was completely in due wouldn't be sold until after her passing. I didn't want the general public, especially my husband, to see me like that while I'm alive. She said, especially my husband. With a laugh, she said, update, I sent the digital recording of Grace's words, along with Roberto's photos and words, via email to my attorney, Gail S.H., who contacted me at 7:30 on the morning of the 17th. I told her my divorce petition was clearly justified, citing infidelity. I told her a law enforcement officer would serve Laura the following night at the gala. I said, there's one more thing, and told her I'd drop it off so she could include it when talking to the process server. I also gave her an envelope addressed to Angela to Gail, which had a letter from me, a swab from the Italian janitor's cheek, a container with a new swab, and an envelope with express mail postage addressed to a DNA lab, along with instructions. The letter to Angela said that if there was any hope for a future, it would be up to her. Relationship between us, she needed to swab the inside of her cheek, place it in the envelope addressed to the DNA lab with my swab already in it, and send it via express mail. The lab had instructions to mail the results directly to her at school and to me. I told her that even if she didn't want to be in a relationship with me, she still had to do what I said. She didn't, so I made it clear that I'd take care of our finances for years, which led her to say goodbye to tuition, room and board, and expenses for the end of her junior and senior years at the expensive private college she was attending. I told her that even if she felt the same way about me as she did in the past, it was in her best interest to do what I asked. She'd be better off doing what I asked. I told her Grace had already agreed, and the letter was signed by your dad, Grant Oster. I was glad I wasn't there when the reality hit in Chicago on my birthday. The process server told Gail that Laura and Angela were all smiles as they mingled with the public at around 9:00 p.m. On the 18th, they were confused when the police officer gave them the envelopes and took pictures with the process server. They opened the envelopes right away, and the police officer left, but the process server stayed and took more pictures until he was kicked out. He emailed the pictures to Gail. On the 18th, they were confused when the law enforcement officer, who was the process server, gave them the envelopes. He took photos while they opened the envelopes right there. The officer left, but the process server stayed and took more photos until he was kicked out. He emailed the photos to Gail and to me. The photos showed Laura sinking lower and lower onto the ground until she finally landed in a fetal position. Angela went from being distraught to angry, and then she tried to help her lying down mother. Angela called me on the morning of the 19th. She said she was disgusted with the way I had served the papers. I fired back, using a level of intensity I'd never used with her before. I said it was tough, and she should talk to someone who cares. Then she said she didn't want to do the DNA test. I asked her if she didn't want to find out who her biological dad is, instead of the one who's been supporting her. I said, language I had never used with her before. Saying it was tough and that she should tell someone who cares. She said, I'm not going to do the DNA test. I said, so you're not even going to find out who your biological dad is, the guy who's been supporting you all these years? She said, yeah, I'm your dad. I said, I'm not so sure. Maybe I am, maybe not. But one thing's for sure, I've already told my lawyer to freeze all of your mom's and my accounts. And there won't be any money for your education. I told her I hadn't lied to her, but she insisted that I had. I said I didn't want to waste any more time on this because it was making me feel disgusted. I said I was pretty sure I wasn't her father, but she said she was sure she was. I told her I'd already told my lawyer to freeze all her accounts and that there wouldn't be any money for her education or living expenses after she turned 20. Then I remembered that I needed a video of her swabbing her cheek, putting it in the envelope, and mailing it because of the lies she had told. He told her I hadn't lied to her, but she said I hadn't told the whole truth. She said my sister's tuition was paid, and I told her I was disappointed. She said she was as unpleasant as her mother, and I said I didn't want to talk about it anymore because it disgusted me. I told her I hadn't lied, but she said I hadn't told the whole truth. She said her tuition should be paid, and I said I was disappointed. I said she was as unpleasant as her mother and I didn't want to waste time talking about it. I told her to either do what I said and email me the video or this would be the last conversation we ever had. Then I hung up. It feels good to have a landline because when you hang up, it makes a statement. With a cell phone, pushing the red button doesn't really convey the same message. I gave her an ultimatum, either email me the video or this would be the last conversation we ever had. After that, I hung up. It's satisfying to have a landline where slamming the phone down makes a statement, unlike a cell phone where pushing the red button provides no emphasis. The mother didn't try to call me from the 18th to the 21st. She probably delayed her return to Columbus for 2 days, consoling herself with her close friend Gina. The excitement at the exhibition on the 18th made its way into 2 local Chicago papers, complete with a photo of Laura, seemingly provided by the mother. Didn't try to call me from the 18th to the 21st. She probably delayed her return to Columbus for 2 days, consoling herself with her close friend Gina. The excitement about the exhibition on the 18th made its way into 2 local Chicago papers, complete with a photo of Laura, seemingly provided by the process server. I found some amusement in that, even though I felt like puking. It was clear that Laura had been to the house on the 22nd, which I no longer considered home. I figured this out because of the envelope I left on the new front door. It was reinforced with steel and a changed lock, similar to the side. I was pretty sure that Laura had been to the house, which I didn't even consider home anymore, on the 22nd. I figured this out when I found the envelope I'd left on the new front door. It had a steel reinforcement and a changed lock, similar to the side. The rear doors had gone missing. My lawyer called and said we needed to talk. The envelope was addressed to Vile Ducks, which I thought was a reference to a slot machine. I figured Laura would know what I was getting at. I wrote a quick note inside that said, "Hey, get in touch with your attorney about getting your stuff back. The sooner we sell the house and end this sham of a marriage, the better. I'll resist any attempt by you to come back to this house until it's sold. Consider doing something decent for once in our relationship, and don't resist it, even though money seems to be your only motivation. Since you don't love or respect me, you didn't know what you were doing. Grant, P.S., the doors have booby traps. If someone who isn't allowed gets in, all your old family albums will start burning." We ended up going to court and hiring lawyers just to figure out the living arrangements. I probably could have gotten exactly what I wanted if I hadn't written that P.S. on the note to the slot, but I couldn't help myself. We finally agreed to both leave the house and put it on the market, and the amount of our temporary housing expenses would be considered in the division. Laura tried to be difficult during the money talks, but she didn't have much leverage. She got her rare photos from Pierrot when we were still hitched. I said, 5 photos, then you pick one, then me, and so on until all 10 are split up, like your lawyer said. Laura tried to be difficult during the money talks, but she didn't have much leverage. She got her photos from Pierrot when we were still married. I said she could pick one, then me, and so on until all 10 were split up, according to her lawyer. She got hysterical, especially since by then she had seen how I had messed with the family photo albums. At Laura's insistence, we got Roberto's opinion on the photos. We took the appraisal done by an appraiser hired by her, and it was beaten by a neutral one. Roberto's appraisal was the lowest, costing her $200. She went ballistic, especially since by then she had seen how I had messed with the family photo albums. At Laura's insistence, we took Roberto's appraisal of the photographs, one done by an appraiser hired by her and one by a neutral one. It was funny, but Roberto's appraisal was the lowest, costing her $200,000 more than if she had accepted his. This was really cutting into what she would end up with. She offered me 2 of the photos she picked, but then backed out when I told her I'd agree to them, but only if she got them delivered to the local firing range and watched what I did with them. By the time the divorce was finalized, Laura got half the furniture and 1/4 of the sale price of the house, plus nothing else, including no alimony. We did agree to split the college expenses for Grace and Angela until they graduated, but that was it. The DNA results came back and it wasn't my kids, which was no surprise. Laura was pretty upset about that. I talked to Grace about it, not Angela, who had complied with my request solely to get her college expenses paid and was apparently happy with no future relationship with me. My daughter told me that her mom claimed the DNA test results were wrong. According to her mom, she never had any close relationships with anyone other than me and Pierrot, and she never even met Piero before our daughter was born. I asked why, if that were true, our daughter's father had Italian ancestry like Pierrot, while my family is entirely Dutch on both sides. I said I didn't believe it, and that her mother has proven to be a pathological liar throughout our more than 24 years of marriage. She's lied to me about her feelings for me for over 24 years. But then she brought up that her mom wanted another DNA test. I told my kids that wasn't going to happen because they're not minors and it's not related to the divorce. I wanted to know the truth, and I wanted both of them to be aware of it. I reminded them that they witnessed me swabbing my cheek, putting the swab in the envelope, and then mailing it in response to my daughter's request. I mentioned that her mother wanted a face-to-face meeting. I wasn't interested in a face-to-face meeting. I told them I told my lawyer to ignore her over and over again. I asked why I'd ever talked to her. My daughter begged me not to use rude words for her mom and said she still loved her, even though she had problems. She asked me to talk with her, please. I wasn't interested in having a face-to-face conversation. I told them I told my lawyer to ignore her. I asked why I'd ever talked to her. My daughter begged me not to use rude words for her mom and said she loved her, even though she had problems. She asked me to talk to her for an hour. I told Grace I couldn't do it because I forgave her and wanted to be friends. I made it clear that I'd never talked to her mom. Here's the latest on Laura's suspended jail sentence and getting only a quarter of the money from the sale of the. I spent an hour talking to Grace. I told her I couldn't do what she wanted, but I forgave her and wanted to keep in touch. I made it clear that I wouldn't talk to her if she was involved. Here's the latest on Laura's suspended jail sentence and the sale of the house. After my call with Grace about the DNA test and Laura's wish to talk with me, she did something dumb. I thought she might do something, so I got a panic button connected to a private security company. One night, a woman knocked on the door of the condo I was renting during the divorce. After my call with Grace about the DNA test and Laura's wish for a chat with me, she did something unexpected. I thought she might do something, so I hooked up a panic button to a private security company. One night, a woman knocked on the door of the condo I was renting during the divorce. I didn't see the two big guys and Laura standing out to the side when I looked through the peephole. But as soon as I opened the door, the two big guys burst in and grabbed me. But not before I pushed my silent panic button. After being forcefully seized, they pulled me to a chair and secured me to it. While Laura came in and the other woman left, Laura stayed. We finally settled the bill. I didn't see the two guys and Laura standing out to the side when I looked through the peephole. As soon as I opened the door, the two big guys burst in and grabbed me, but not before I pushed my silent panic button. After being forcefully seized, they pulled me to a chair and secured me to it. Meanwhile, Laura came in and the other woman left. Laura said she was sorry for going to such extremes, saying it was because I wouldn't meet with her and redo the DNA test, which she claimed was wrong. Then she started talking, saying she always loved me and that her affection was also for Piero. She said her heart was big enough to love both of them. I apologized for getting mad and going to extremes, and I said it was because she wouldn't meet with me to redo the DNA test. She insisted it was wrong, and then she started talking about how she always loved me and how she also loved Piero. She said she had room in her heart for both of us. She realized we couldn't make up, but she just wanted to get it off her chest. She was holding a swab, so it was clear she was going to get a DNA sample from me. It really annoyed her that I didn't say anything to her. I tried not to look at her, and I avoided eye contact the best I could. Luckily, as she was about to have her two goons pry my mouth open for a DNA swab, there was a response to my panic button. The security company had called the police, and 3 cops with weapons drawn barged into the house. They found me tied up, and one of the bad guys had illegal stuff in his pants pocket. I explained the situation, but the cops ignored Laura's plea to simply let them go. They didn't mean any harm and arrested all 3 of them. The kidnapping didn't go over well with the judge in our divorce case, though. She said that if she had to rule, it would be really bad for Laura. I got the division of assets and other stuff mentioned above. The criminal court took pity on her, since it was her first offense, and she got a 2-year suspended sentence and a $10 fine. They didn't cause any damage and the police arrested them. The kidnapping didn't go over well with the judge in our divorce case. She said that if she had to rule, it would be really bad for Laura. I got the division of assets and other stuff mentioned above. The criminal court took pity on Laura, since it was her first offense. She got a 2-year suspended sentence and a $10,000 fine, which was from her share of the marital assets. The 2 guys didn't fare as well because of their checkered pasts. One guy got a year in prison before parole, and the other got 5 years. My 4th plan didn't end when the divorce was finalized, but I won't say here or anywhere else that I had anything to do with it. I just say that karma is what I always respond when asked about it. 18 months after the divorce was finalized, I was on a cruise of the Caribbean with a 32-year-old. She was an older, hot, little divorcee who loved to be treated right. She looked a lot like Laura when she was that age, and she was too hot for me to look for a permanent relationship with her, but she was fun to be with. She was a bit much for me to date while I was dating on the cruise, but it was fun. While she was at work, someone broke into Laura's apartment. The place was trashed, and some items were stolen during the break-in. Laura was a hot, divorced woman who loved to be treated right. She looked a lot like Laura when she was that age, and she was too hot for me to want a permanent relationship with her. She was fun to be with, even though she wore me out. While I was dating Laura on the cruise, her apartment was broken into. The place was a mess, and some stuff was stolen. The most valuable and provocative Romano photo of Laura was among the items stolen. More stuff got destroyed than stolen, though, including 7 of the other 8 remaining Romano photos and all of the family photo albums. When I got back, I became a suspect. It was impossible for me to have committed the crime myself, since I was on a boat 2,000 miles away. More items were destroyed than stolen, including 7 of the other 8 remaining Romano photos and all of the family photo albums. When I got back, I became a suspect. It was impossible for me to have committed the crime myself, since I was on a boat 2,000 miles away. Laura told the cops that I paid someone to do it. As soon as the cops approached me and hinted that I was a suspect, I refused to talk to them and sought legal representation. After looking over my phone and financial records, which didn't show Ed, I found that the 2 cashed out bearer bonds that weren't part of the divorce estate. They didn't find any proof that I could have paid anyone to do it. They also couldn't find anyone who could have done it. It seemed like the cops had basically given up 6 months after they first started asking questions. Even though I'm pretty sure Laura kept bugging them when the deadline to file passed, I threw a party to celebrate. Most of the people there were friends, but my parents weren't there. My brother, his wife, my 2 nephews, and my new girlfriend, Melody, were there. It had been 6 months since they first got in touch with me, and it looked like the cops had basically given up. I'm pretty sure Laura wouldn't stop bugging them after the statute of limitations ran out. I threw a party to celebrate that it's all behind us. Most of the people there were friends. My parents were deceased, but my brother, his wife, my 2 nephews, my new girlfriend Melody, Melody's 2 grown kids, her husband, and my granddaughter were there. I didn't have a relationship with Angela, and I wasn't invited to her wedding, so I wouldn't have gone even if I had been invited. I heard from Grace that Angela's husband caught her cheating, and she's in the early stages of divorce. Laura gave Grace an ultimatum: either cut all ties with me or with. To everyone's surprise, including my own, Grace chose me, probably because she was convinced that Laura was a pathological liar. More importantly, Grace realized how negative it was for her mom to bring up her relationship with her paramour and have them lie to cover up her cheating. Grace didn't want her kids exposed to that. We haven't always seen eye to eye, especially over the last 5 years. I think the main thing that's caused some tension between us is that I'm always straight with her. When she found out about the DNA testing, she was initially upset with me, but she forgave me just as I forgave her for her duplicity over the years. She was actually very pleased that I was her biological father, and I had another DNA test done to provide additional confirmation.